Good afternoon. My name is Johan Westenberg, and this is the first lecture for Contemporary Economic Issues, the class that is being taught at Hopkinsville Community College online. And we are going to spend this first class talking a little bit about the structure of the class, and then we will have a short lecture dealing with the first topic, which is You, Kentucky, and the Economy, Understanding the Field of Inquiry. A couple of changes. The textbook that we are using for this class this semester is going to be the Microeconomics textbook by Campbell McConnell, the 21st edition that is available at the Hopkinsville Community Bookstore and has also been billed as part of your class fees. So if you look at the syllabus as it's been written up, you'll see there is a reference to the author of a Mathematics for Economists textbook and also a survey of economics. We will not be using those, and they are not required texts for this class. The only required text for this class is the Microeconomics textbook that is part of your class fee. The course competencies for this class are an exposure to analytical problem solving and organizational skills, essentially for the contemporary job market. I personally believe that economics is an incredibly important part of everyone's daily life. I'm sure that you probably have that intuition as well. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have signed up for this course. In the 8 weeks that we have, we will learn some of the basic disciplines needed to understand critical thinking. We will be looking at how to make quantifiable data graphs and how to interpret those quantifiable data graphs. And we will be looking at how simple mathematical models help us understand the economy and the choices we make. My office hours, since this is an online course, it would be very helpful if you need to speak with me, just send an email about 12 hours before, and I will be happy to answer your question either in email form or I will make arrangements to have a conversation with you on the phone. Course requirements are pretty straightforward. I would like very much for you to log in for each of the following modules and then complete the problem set at the conclusion of the module. So just to go over the topics we will be discussing in the next 8 weeks. Today's topic is, as I mentioned earlier, You, Kentucky, and the Economy, Understanding the Field of Inquiry. Next week, we will be talking about scarcity, work, and choice. The week after that, property and power. Week 4 will be supply and demand in the market. Week 5 will address the topic of elasticity as it is used in the economics field. Week 6, production costs and dividends. Week 7, the bigger picture, competition among nations, regions, and hemispheres. And this is really international economics. And then the last week, we will talk about government interventions and social contracts. Now, the way that I lined up these 8 weeks may not correspond exactly to how the microeconomics textbook uses the topics that it wants to discuss. I think it's important to say that obviously Campbell McConnell has a very good idea about how he wants to explain things. Microeconomics at that level of explanation is more than what we are going to be able to do in 8 weeks. So I have basically tried to create a class that allows you to hit the high points. And obviously there's no need to take notes on any of this at this point, but I think it's important to explain the difference between the way that McConnell sets up his book and the way we will be teaching the class in these coming weeks. The grading policy. There will be 3 exams, and those exams will take up 30% of your grade, and we will do exams after the 3rd week and after the 6th week and after the last week. Then there are the model completion and problem sets, and they will take up 40% of your grade. I expect that you make every effort to try to understand what we're talking about every week, and then the problem sets will help me understand whether or not you're comprehending what we are discussing and what we are reading about. The last part of the requirements for the completion of this class is what I call an economic issues journal. And this is something I think is really important because it allows people to understand what basic tools you need to employ all the time to make judgments about economics, to make judgments about the firms that you use, to make judgments about the decisions you make for even running your own household. Keeping an economics journal is just a very good habit to get into. What I decided we would try to do for this specific class is pretty straightforward. I want you to pick a Kentucky business, and I want you to follow that Kentucky business for the 8 weeks. And there are a couple of ways that you can make a journal. I'll give you an example. You can make a little book, like this, and you can make notes in the book, and you can put in article clippings, and you can put in question marks and observations, things that you find. Or, of course, if you want to do like make it with clippings and whatnot, you can make a large folder, and then each folder can have different articles where you clip out things and you keep it all together in one thing. And you can print out articles from things that you find online, and that will be fine too. It's important that the Economic Issues Journal is a document that is physical, not something that's just online, because I want you to, at the end of the semester, send it to Hopkinsville Community College either physically, so that I can see it physically, or I want you to send me photographs via Dropbox or some sort of zip file so that I can make sure that you've actually put together an economics journal that shows that you've been looking at this one particular business based in Kentucky that you chose this week. So that's an important part of your grade, and I think you will benefit greatly by having done this. Just a quick brief comment on classroom and online management. I think it's really important to say that whatever we do as a group, whatever you do as students amongst one another, whatever you communicate online in the classroom context, it's very important that we treat each other with respect, and especially students who feel that that their opinions are important. I think we all feel that our opinions are important, but in a classroom context, our opinions should be put away while our interest in facts should be explored in full. There's, of course, a code of conduct at Hopkinsville Community College, and that code of conduct is online at the KCTCS website, and you are certainly welcome and to take a look at that. I hope you do take a look at it. Okay, that basically takes care of the course outline. And now I would like to get into the first chapter, which is of this module, which is called You, Kentucky, and the Economy. There are, in this first chapter that you'll read, there's a chapter called Limits, Alternatives, and Choices, and that's, I think, the chapter I want you to focus on for this week. And it's a long chapter. There's a lot of information to go through, and I think it's complicated to assume that you'll be able to plug all the way through it, but there are 4 concepts that I want to really have you focus on for this first week. The first is how to define economics. And it's important to have a definition that we all agree on, and that is as close to a universal, if that's possible, a universal understanding of what it means to study economics and to talk about economics. The definition in the McConnell book is actually pretty good. I'm going to just read it for you here and cite it. Economics is the social science that examines how individuals, institutions, and society make optimal choices under conditions of scarcity. Central to economics is the idea of opportunity costs and the value of the good, service, or time forgone to obtain something else. Now, what that really means is that economics is about making choices, and we always have choices to make between one thing or the other. And of course, when we're talking informally, we talk about maybe I've got 10 of these choices and 2 of those choices, but that doesn't work for economics. Economics, you really have to choose between one object and another object. And it's important that you understand that that's just a tool for comparing. It doesn't mean that that is how we live our lives. It means that is how we start to understand how economics works. Economics is very reliant on mathematics, and it's also very reliant on visuals such as graphs. And these graphs, help us understand that binary choice mechanism, A or B. And for everything that you have in A, you have to take away something from B. For everything that you have in B, you have to take away something from A. One of the jokes that people always make about economists is that why are there no one-handed economists? Because if there was a one-handed economist, he would not be able to say, well, on the one hand, you have this, and on the other hand, you have that. Um, Opportunity costs, which is the second part of that sentence, is also really important because economics deals with products and services and goods, and they're all called goods, but each good has an opportunity cost that when you take good one, you have to take something away from good two, and that's where the opportunity cost comes in. And I think when you read chapter 1, there's a good explanation of how opportunity costs work, and McConnell comes back to it repeatedly. I'm going to just go back here and think about it here so that we're talking about the same thing. The example that McConnell uses, which I like, is in the military you have the opportunity costs and the economics of war. And there's some conclusions there that I might not agree with, but certainly the essential argument of what an opportunity cost is clearly related there. So we've talked a little bit about economics and what it means. We've talked briefly about opportunity costs and that concept and where you can find a discussion of that in the McConnell book. Now, the third thing that I think is really important for you to think about in this first week is what is called the ceteris paribus assumption of economics. Ceteris paribus means all other things being constant. And because in any discussion of economics, we're really comparing one thing to another thing, and we're constantly forced to limit our discussion to one thing comparing it to another thing, we want to make sure that it's clear that all of the other background noise that may influence that one choice or the other choice needs to be put down, needs to be shut down. So, for example, if you're talking about the choice of whether you are going to work in Hopkinsville or you are going to work in South Dakota, it's very important to think that all of the emotional decisions, all of the decisions about time and distance and travel, those all have to be put aside, and you just have to make a choice between the price of your wage in South Dakota versus the price of your wage in Hopkinsville. Everything else is not relevant for that particular comparison. Now, why do I focus on ceteris paribus as being so important is in any discussion of economics, there is a constant tendency of people to get upset because they don't like the information they're hearing. And you see that especially on the news where, economic news comes in and, people get very upset about what kind of information they're hearing, and they draw conclusions, and then of course over the coffee table people have very different opinions and they think they're talking about the same thing. That's probably fairly true, but one of the things that people forget is that all of the things that we talk about in economics always really need to be qualified by saying all other things being constant. And I think if you always put that sentence, all other things being constant, into all of your thinking about economics, it will force you to think about the economy as it's understood in the media in a very different way, because you will not allow yourself to kind of get sidetracked into thinking that the facts on the table are all the facts on the table. There are always extenuating circumstances. And for every decision we make, economically speaking, there are a myriad of non-rational extenuating circumstances that influence our thinking. However, when we're talking about economics, we are putting all of those extenuating circumstances aside, so we are making sure that they are not reflected upon. The last important concept that I want you to think about when you're reading this first chapter is called the economizing problem. And the word scarcity is really, I think, a good way to understand that. Everything in economics and everything in our economic behavior is about scarcity. We have unlimited wants and limited means. So everything we choose, we have to make decisions that, split one from the other. And this economizing problem works on a personal level because we have a limited budget, but it also works on a global level and a regional level and a national level, because every larger institution, whether it's the state, whether it's the nation, whether it's a segment of society, has limited resources, limited land, limited development technology, limited ability to educate its population, limited technical expertise. All of these things are part of the economizing problem at a societal level. On a personal level, the economizing problem is interesting because it is a question of, how much money do we have and how much can we afford? And within society, of course, there are all sorts of tools to help us forget about our economizing problem. I'm thinking, of course, of credit cards, of introductory deals, of 1 month free rents, etc., etc. But in your reading this week, you will be well served if you reflect on the economizing problem on a personal level, on a business level, as well as on a regional and national level. Okay, that basically takes care of my introductory comments for this first class. When you go to the module in Blackboard, you will find that I've made some study questions, and I'll just go over those briefly, and you can read them fully online. The first question is really reflective. It's really very personal. I want you to think about 3 examples where you've made decisions based on the marginal cost versus the marginal benefit. And what that means is, every time you make a choice, do I put gas in the car? You have to also think that there is a marginal benefit to having made that choice. So you've given up something and you have chosen for gas in the car, and then you also have a marginal benefit, which is the added value of having made that choice. I would suggest read the McConnell text carefully, think of those 3 examples, and then there's a nice little graph, and I'm not really convinced that the graph is always clear to people, but it's a good way to start thinking about graphing. In the vertical column, you have the marginal benefit and marginal cost, and in the horizontal column, you have the quantity of units that you chose for. So let's go back to the gasoline model. On the horizontal, let's say you choose to fill up your car with 20 gallons of gas, and each gallon of gas will get you a little further along the road to, let's say, work. Where the marginal cost and the marginal benefits intersect, that is what would be considered optimal. And that's not really realistic. It's just a model. It's just a model, and it's important to remember that. Because, as I said earlier, that with the example in the McConnell book of the military spending, there's a lot of other factors that influence marginal benefit, and it's very hard to quantify some of those things. So this is really sort of a reflective question. There's no particularly right or wrong answer, but I want you to think about 3 examples where you have weighed the cost of something against the benefit of something. And I want you to write that down, even more for yourself than even for me. The second study question is about what choices you might make if you were to win a lotto ticket. And this explores your ability to make a graph and make a table of all the production possibilities that you are able to make given a certain amount of income. And well, let's say that you win $15 in a lotto ticket and you decide to spend it all on candy bars and beer. Well, there are different ways that you can allocate that income. You can buy all candy bars or you can buy all beer. And I want you to think carefully about how many candy bars you can buy and how many beers you can buy. And then you put the candy bars on one axis and you put the beer on another axis, and you make a budget line of the different things that you can do. Anything below that budget line is what we would consider attainable. Anything above that budget line is outside of the possibility frontier of what you can do. Again, read the chapter. In the chapter they talk about it, I think, in other ways. They talk about it with beer and pizza or something like that. But the principles are always the same. The modeling is the same. And then the last question for the modules, that is about how households choose to allocate their income and how that might have an impact on the national level. So, for example, it's been shown that American households only save about 5% of their annual income, whereas other countries like China save about 40% of their annual income. The growth rate of the economy of China is about, 2018 it was about 6%, and the growth rate of the U.S. economy is about 3%, and that was back in 2018. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about the growth to savings ratio between those countries and make up a graph and compare the 2 graphs, or compare the 2 slopes on the graph. And then I want you to maybe make some conclusions, or just intuitive conclusions, about what those different rates of savings might do for the different rates of growth. My question specifically is, do you think that the rate of savings that happens in China is more beneficial than the rate of savings that we have here in the United States? Do you think that the rate of investment that people assume, let's assume that your savings you invest into the economy, which is probably true, that is more beneficial in the United States or in China? All three of these questions leave a lot of room for you to interpret. So I really hope that you aren't scared of what these questions kind of imply. The information is in the book, in the first chapter. These are pretty rudimentary math exercises that allow you to explore how choices change over the inputs, and you would be well served if you haven't been doing things with a graph lately and you haven't been using your basic algebra skills lately, which might be very common. There's an appendix that allows for you to take a look at some of these basic math skills that might need to be honed a little bit. And you can read that appendix first and check out those mathematical formulas first. I've made in the modules, I've made some notes about how to do the math, and obviously, as I said, at this first week, I'm not going to grade you on whether your answers are correct or not. It will really be an opportunity for me to see if you understand what the chapter is really about. All right, so that is a conclusion to our first lecture, and I will try to make a video every week to introduce the topic that we're talking about, and I will certainly try to read your questions during the week and incorporate them into next week's video presentation. So thank you for checking in. Thank you for being a part of the class, and I look forward to hearing from you during the week. Okay.